Hello, welcome to this screen recording where I'm going to walk through solving a relatively simple bug in Inkscape with our Outreachy friends Kavya and Divyanka who are here. This is 2021 Outreachy, and we are looking at the problem of auto showing docs when you have all of the docs hidden. So you hide all the docs pressing F12, and then you want to show one of the dialogues. Currently, what happens is absolutely nothing. Your dialog won't be shown, and it won't actually tell you why. So in order to fix this, we have to look at the Inkscape codebase. So this assumes that you have already compiled Inkscape. And the way I like to start is I change directory into my Inkscape building folder. I will do a git status to see whether I'm up to date and whether I'm on the correct branch. You should make sure that you are checked out onto the master branch. You should make sure that you pull any changes so to make sure that you're as up to date as you can be. And then you should use Ninja or CMake to build Inkscape to make sure that you have a fully built Inkscape that works. At this point, you can actually open up Inkscape and test, see whether the problem exists. So in this case, the assumption is that we have a dialog with the target is going to be this align and distribute dialog. And then we press F12, it hides them, and then we try and show the align and distribute. And you can see it didn't do anything. That's because it's hidden. You can see when I press F12, it shows the dialog again. So what we really need to do is we need to switch the flag off when we show a new dialog, right? So whenever we ask to show a new dialog, it should flip off the F12, whatever F12 does. And because the Inkscape codebase is so big, you can actually have a look at it. I look at the source code, and there's just so many files that you will get lost very quickly if you try to read them all. And so what I do is I have a look at the function I'm trying to figure out how it works. And in this case it's F12, but I know it also exists somewhere here. Show hide dialogs, F12. There it is. So what I can do is I can go into the source code, and I use this tool called grep. Recursively, I use grep to have a look for show hide, and you'll see it returns a couple of different files. Most functions in Inkscape appear as verbs, and once you have a verb name for whatever the function is, you can search for that as well. It's actually being used inside of verbs, so sometimes they're used inside, sometimes they're not. I need to copy that. So I'll do a search for this. Oh, that's layer hide. I picked the wrong one. It's supposed to be dialog toggle. So you can see here, when a person hits that dialog toggle, it runs this code, container toggle dialogs. So what I'll do then is I'll trace the code. So I'll use grep again, toggle dialogs. I'll figure out that, oh, it's being used in UI dialogs dialog container.cpp. And it's not being used anywhere else, which means it's a fairly direct function that's only being used through one code path. So I'll go into here, I'll look for toggle dialogs. It's not doing the work here, it's actually calling columns toggle multipane children. So I'm going to use grep again to search for toggle multipane children. You can see here it's moved from UI dialog multipaned to UI dialog from the container, I should say. I got that the wrong way around. From dialog container to dialog multipaned. So we're going to have a look inside dialog multipaned. We want to search for this big long thing. Okay. So now that I've found the function that's actually being called, I can see what it's doing. It's saying the hide multipaned variable is equal to not hide multipaned, right?
So this is basically toggling a boolean between true and false. Every time you call this function, it'll flip this boolean around. And I want to check to see whether it's private or public, because if it's public, it could be used anywhere in the code, but if it's private, it's going to be used just in this function, in this class, I should say. So there's our boolean, and you can see here it's private, which means it's going to be only used in this code, which is good for us because it reduces complexity. And then I can have a look at where it's being used. So here's the creator or constructor. It's being preset to false, so by default it does not hide things. This is the setter we just seen, and then this is the first use of it. It's being used in a function called onSizeAllocate, which is a GTK internal that you override when you write GTK widgets and customize them. What this does is it allows your code to calculate how much size it wants to take up inside the user interface. And you can see here what it's doing is it's saying if the hide multi-paint is set, then we set the visible to false, and this basically just says that the minimums and naturals is 0, so that the amount of space that the widgets for the docs will take up is nothing, so it won't take up too much space. We'll keep going. We can see here that it's also being used here in the hide multi-paint, left and right. Let's see. So it's on drag update, which means in this case it's being used as a blocker to stop you from dragging floating dialogues and docking them while the dialogues are supposed to be hidden. And then is it being used anywhere else? No, we're back to the constructor. Okay, so now we kind of understand how this hiding system works. It's just setting a boolean and then refreshing the widget. And if the widget detects that it's supposed to be hidden, it just kind of allocates nothing to itself. And then the other half of this bug is that we have a situation where when we're asking for a new dialogue to be shown, that boolean stops the dialogue from being shown correctly. Now, my interpretation of the fix is that what we should be doing here is setting hide multi-paint to false when we're asked to show any new child dialogue, right? And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to load up the header file to have a look at the functions that are available in here and see if any of them seem like the kind of function that would show a new dialogue child or add a new dialogue child, for example. Let's see. So this is our multi-pane. So there's prepend and append. Those are pretty good targets. We have get first widget and get last widget. Don't forget, because this boolean is private, whatever we do has to probably be changed inside here. So probably not these getters. We've got a set target entries, but we don't know what that does. And let's see, signal now empty. That's the function that we had. Set drum jump size. That's probably not it. These are protected functions, so those are all the overrides for GTK. So those are not going to be it. I think our best bets are probably this append and prepend. But let's have a look. Just going to check for questions and comments. Okay, so we have this append, and it says remove empty widget if there's an empty widget. If there are multi-pane children that are empty, they will be removed. Okay. Add handle, add child, show all. Okay, so you can see here it's basically just like showing all and then doing that. So what I would try is I would do. Actually, what does prepend do? Because it's doing the same thing. the last thing we want is doing loads of the same code over and over and over again. We want it to be smart. Okay, prepend. Yeah, it basically does the same thing. Okay, so what we might want to do in this scenario is, say if we had end, we could, for instance, check the boolean, which I've forgotten the name of, obviously, and then if it's true, we can just call the toggle, right? Because the toggle automatically has its own internal update functions that keeps itself up to date, and this would be pretty straightforward. What is it? Hide multi-pane. And maybe we add a comment to suggest like what it is that we're trying to achieve here. If all the dialogues are hidden and the user wants to show a new one, show all the dialogues as if they had hidden them, and then we'll take those 3 lines of code. There's a nice function in VI. I don't know if the viewer is using VI, but I just press the number 3 and then press DD, and then it can delete them, or I can press 3 and yank them. Let's go to prepend. Say. I want to do the same. Oh, I only yanked one line because I typed it too many times. Three yanks. And paste. Okay, so now I have those 6 new lines, 8 lines actually with the empty lines. Now I've changed the code and I want to try it out. I go back to my build, kill Inkscape, run Ninja again to rebuild it. Hopefully it'll only be a few files, and if you have enough memory, builds can be much faster because it caches a lot of the data in RAM, and then when you rerun it, it helps speed up the development process a lot. While it's doing that, let's have a quick check. No new questions, not a problem. Okay, so now we have a linked version. We're going to have a check and see what it does. So we ask it for the fill and stroke dialog. It does that. We hide. Let's see. I can just press F12. I know it was in view. Show hide dialogs, and then I want to ask for the align and stroke dialog. It didn't work. Didn't do anything. It did show inside the widget, but it didn't run the code as we expected, which means that either the code, the assumption that we're making about what code it's running, didn't work, or toggling this back didn't function in the way that we thought it would, which is a shame. It would have been easy to just have it, to automatically show. So sometimes what we can do is to check the code paths are running. We can actually put in a G1, and sometimes you can do a standard cout. Both will work for debugging, so I'll put in a G1. You can also use GDB to create a breakpoint and stop at the right line. There are lots of different ways of doing it. So I'm prepending to dialog multi-paned, and pending to multi-paint. And then I'll try it again. You can hear a whirring sound in the background. That's my laptop's fan, because building things can be heavy on your computer. You can see here I'm giving it eight cores. Okay, so it's append, and then I ask for the aligner stroke. Doesn't do anything. So it's clearly not showing. You know, it's not showing the dialog when it's. Sorry, I should say it's not toggling the append code path when you show a new dialog, which explains why when I hide them using F12 and then I ask for the dialog again, that code doesn't run, so it doesn't toggle it back. So that confirms my suspicion that this code isn't useful. So what I will do is I'll exit out of Vim. I'll do a git state status to see what I've modified. And you can even do a git diff to see I've added these lines. And what I do is I just git check out this file, and now it's back to its pristine state. So when you do a checkout on a file name, what you're asking Git to do is basically just check out whatever the version of this file is that's in the repository, which is a good way to just reset back to initial conditions. Okay, so that didn't work in this particular scenario, and it might be that what we're looking for here is there's a dialog base. Now, I know this because I've worked on dialog code before, but you may not have, which means that to a certain degree you have to continue using the methods that I showed you before with using grep, or you can use the directories themselves to kind of get a sense for what's going on. In this particular case, I'm pretty sure that dialog base is where these dialogues are being instantiated. So when we ask for a new dialog, this is code that gets run. So it's a UI dialog base. This is what makes projects like Inkscape hard to contribute to, is not necessarily that the community itself is unwelcoming or like the code, the actual code is hard to understand. It's just there's so much of it that you can get lost pretty easily. And a person like myself who's venerable, like we've been around for a while, we're actually a good resource to ask. If you say, I'm looking for code that's, you know, related to this function or this thing, especially when you get lost and grep is not helping you, and like just looking at file names or directories isn't helping you, asking is a great idea. We have a Rocket Chat channel where you can basically ask. Let's have a look. I know Blink gets called when you ask for a new dialog, so I'm actually going to just do a search for Blink to see. Blink is what happens when it flashes on and off inside a dialog. It's called here in fill and stroke. I think it's called. Nope, that's just the definition. It's called in dialog container. So the parent of the. Okay, so here's a likely candidate, right? So we have a new dialog, and the code base is pretty simple. We're going to get the verb for whatever the dialog is that we're trying to get. These are just codes that say whether it's the fill and stroke dialog or some other dialog. If we can't get the verb, we're going to return that basically says that you've asked for something that doesn't exist. This should probably warn or give some kind of an output. And then it says, okay, we're going to have a look at whether this has an existing dialog by calling this function. If it already exists, i.e. it's already open, and then we're going to blink it to flash it on and off.
for the person, and then return. If it doesn't exist, then we're going to dialog factory it into existence. And then yeah, so the thing is that we have a situation where we need to show, we need to unhide these things, but the variable that we need to change actually isn't available here. It's a private in a different section of code, and that means we have to reset, or we have to reconfigure slightly how this relationship works between dialog container and dialog. What was it? Dialog multipaint. That's it. So multipaint is where our problem is, and what we're going to have a look at is this, right? So this toggle is not flexible enough, right? Because there's no way to say ensure that this dialog multipaint is visible, right? And that's really what we need to be able to say. So we need to create a new void function here, dialog multipaint, and instead of toggle, I'm going to put ensure multipaint children, and then it's going to be almost the same code, except that instead of saying not, it's just always going to set it to false. And then we're going to add a comment for the documentation, which will always help and always make other developers happy. We say ensure that this dialog container is visible. Yep. And then what we're going to do is we have to add that to the header so that it's available to other functions, and we need to make sure that it's put into the public part of the class. So you say it's public, and then we're going to go here. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to copy that and then change that to ensure. Okay, now I have a function that should set the multipaint to visible. I can go into the container, and then I'm going to have a look at where this is being used. So it's basically just saying columns toggle multipaint children. Okay, so there's clearly a variable called columns that's available. So I'm just going to copy that line of code, go to, what was it called? Like add a new, I should have remembered or written down new dialog. There we were. So if the verb isn't found, I'm not interested in running my code, but I am interested in showing the dialogues if it's blinking and or if it's creating a new one, right? So I am interested in forcing it to be shown, right? So I'll say, oh, that's not what I wanted. I wanted this one, columns. So columns ensure multipaint children. So I'm calling this new function that I've created, and I'm pretty sure columns is the right class, and I can check to see if it's the right thing. Right, so yeah, so it's columns is a dialog multipaint, and so we know we're calling the right thing. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to come back here to my building tab and ask it to build. When I do, I'm going to answer that question that came in. Ah, yes, this is about outreachy. Accidentally closed the outreachy. It wasn't an accident, it was on purpose, but I regret it. Prematurely. Built. Make sure that sometimes you'll get warnings when you build. You don't have to fix them all if you weren't involved in creating the problem. No, none of that relates to what I've just changed. So now I've run Inkscape. I'll press F12 to hide things. and then I'll ask it for the align and stroke dialog. And it shows the dialog. Hide. Show. You can see it blinked as well. So I hide. Show. I'm going to actually push it on the other side. 12. Show. Oh, show. Cool. Okay, so now that I've tested it, I'm going to actually pull this into a floating dialog and see F12. So you can see F12 doesn't change that. I show. Okay, so if I ask for the align and stroke dialog, even though it's floating, it does make these visible again. Which means there's a subtle design decision about whether you should show non-floating dialogues or not. And this depends on how hard you want to get into a problem, because all problems can be done in ever more perfect ways. But this is definitely better than it was before. So I think we're good. And then what you do once you have the code, you can press status. You can see I've modified 3 files here. I use git add, and then I use -p. And what this does is it allows me to review the code and make sure I'm not committing things like debug warnings, commented out code, stuff that I shouldn't be committing. So I intend for that line to go in, and these lines are correct, and this line is correct. So I could just press yes to each one, and then you press no if the block is something you don't want to commit. Look at the status. So I've staged these files, and now I'm going to check out a new branch, right? So if I do check out, give my branch a new name. It could be anything, but I tend to stick to a pattern of saying fix and then whatever the number is for the issue, and then maybe I'll give it a name of what I did. Show multi-pane. Okay, so now that I have a branch, I will commit the staged things that I have. I will say make sure dialogues are visible when requested. And I'll say comma, and I'll say fixes, and then I'll paste in the full URL to the issue, like this. And you can see here it's have one branch. I'll say git push, and it will say no, you can't do that because you have to set upstream. Now I actually have a couple of upstreams set, which you can see with origin. No. Actually, I've forgotten what the command is. Remote, that's it. There we go. So you can see I have a bunch of remotes, and Dr. Mo is my GitLab remote. So you can see here I'm setting the upstream to Dr. Mo on GitLab, which means it'll push it. And GitLab handily gives you a response back that says, hey, you've created a new branch. You can click on this link to create a merge request. And then all I do here is I reformat this to give it to put fix 2124. Make sure dialog is visible when requested. And then maybe I'll format this, and maybe I'll tag some individuals to see, if they should be notified. And then I will press create merge request. Now, I'm not going to do that because I've actually given this issue to somebody else to fix. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave it there. That concludes this portion. And if you have any questions, please reach out in either the Outreachy chat or the developer chat for Inkscape. Thank you if you're listening later on, and maybe I'll do some more of these recordings if you're interested.